we'll get started. So look at this. Let's kind of like tag team this as much as we like, but we decided on the title, fundamental questions for you and your approach to automation. So originally we had this idea of doing a tips and tricks sessions around automation, but as we began to look through the questions that we suggested in terms of the talking points, we kind of got to the point where it was like, these aren't really tips or tricks. These are questions that you should, as admins, developers, whatever we're doing when we're creating automation, that basically the idea is that these are the kind of questions you should really ask before you create whatever automation you're going to create. And as you go through these questions, one thing I think is if you take out the word automation, these questions can apply to just about any context within Salesforce. It can apply to how you design your org, how you do user experience design. It can apply to things like just administrating your basic work within the custom objects and standard objects. But we'll get into the first one, and we'll go through there. So the first question we're going to ask is, who are you automating for? So Luke, what was your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's always great to, exactly as the title suggests, to consider who you're automating for. So you might know what you need to automate, what solution you might use, exactly what you want to happen. But I think it's always good to focus yourself on who it is that you're automating for. What's the audience? Is it a particular persona, a particular user type? Is it something that will benefit the admins? Is it something that will benefit management? Who's your context? Who's your customer? What are you trying to help them do? I think it's really good to focus in on the who of who you're automating for.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And I think that's a very good question to ask off the bat. And as mentioned, these kind of questions can be tailored to any context, not just automation. So essentially, it's like, who is this for? Is this for going to be designed with the end users in mind? Is it basically there to please management? Who is it for, and how does it affect those particular individuals?
Is it a behind-the-scenes task that's going to support you in an administrative role? Is it going to, reduce some of the burden of tasks you need to do? Is it something users won't even know that's happening? All of those different questions I think are good to ground you before you start working.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else you want to mention on this, or shall we move on to the next?
No, good for me, mate. Good for me.
Cool. So I'll let you take this one more, Luke. But the next one is, what is your user story?
Yeah, I think this one's important, and I think it's around context again. So knowing who you're designing for, or who you're automating for, and what it is that you're trying to do. What's the problem that you're trying to solve? And one of the things I think is very useful to help you in this is user stories. And for anyone on the call that hasn't encountered a user story before, or that doesn't recognize the structure of what you can see on screen, it's a really useful way for you to be able to capture a requirement. And I think the requirement's really important so that you don't focus in straight away on a solution. So it's easy to think that, I need a field on this page layout or a button here, where it's easy to solution, I think, before you've identified the requirement. So I think user stories are useful to show your context. So you might be able to say that as a particular kind of user, I want to, what's the desire? What is the requirement that you want to achieve? And then what's the benefit of that requirement? And again, we're thinking, what's the need before we get to the solution? And I think user stories can be really useful. If me and Mark were to work together, and Mark's to raise a change request or a new requirement, and he might come to me and say, I would like, this field here or this button here to enable me to do X, Y, and Z. I can work with Mark to document that particular story So Mark can give me his requirements. I could potentially take that, go back to him and say, hey, Mark, I've got this user story here. Does this reflect the requirement that you're looking for? And then if me and Mark develop a shared agreement, we know that, yep, we've got a shared agreement of what the requirement is. Then you can explore potential solutions. You know, you could respond to say, well, there's 2 or 3 different ways we could take this. Let's talk this out together. But I think the story, the context of the who, what they want to do, and what the impact of it is, I personally think will help you. Before, again, and I know a lot of this. It's not sort of tips and tricks, but we think these will give you a really good grounding to make good automation solutions. Sure, if you've got anything else to add to that, Mark.
To be honest, I don't really have anything else to add to this one. When we were talking about this earlier on, I was kind of going, well, from a non-profit admin perspective, it's not something that I've really talked about much about user stories. But as you unpacked what you were referring to by user stories, I kind of came to the conclusion that actually I sort of do this anywhere, just without not even really knowing it's user stories. That's one thing I think is potentially a relevant point here, that if you are in a position where you don't necessarily know what we mean by user stories, it's quite likely that you might be doing a bit of this work anyway without even necessarily thinking about it.
Yeah.
Because when you get, say, any kind of request as an admin, at least from my side, one of the things I always do is start asking questions to try and get behind, the why, the what, and the how of whatever that request is. Because oftentimes you get people come to you and say, can I have this? And the first question I always ask myself is, well, what do you mean by this? And that's all part of this side of things with the user stories and gathering requirements.
Yeah, definitely. And I think they're useful. The very basic principle is structured around what you can see on the post-it, but there's loads of good information in there. But I think it just you take a requirement or a solution from somebody, you can translate it back into a requirement, agree acceptance, and then you've got a line in the sand. You've got somewhere to start from. Should be helpful.
Absolutely. So let's move on to the next one, which is, what is your automation goal? So what's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think the key point here, the key question to ask yourself is, what is it that you're hoping to achieve? So when we're talking automation and Salesforce specific automation from workflow rules or process builder or a particular flow, what is it that you're aiming to automate? What would you like that to do? What would you like the impact of that to be? It's really understanding why it is that you would select a record triggered screen flow, for example, or field updates via a process builder, or some outbound messages, or emails to be sent out in automation. Again, ask yourself the question, what is it that we're trying to achieve? Because I think you need to know what you want the automation to do before you pick the right tool. Are you trying to save time? Are you trying to improve the user experience? Are you trying to do something clever and kill 2 birds with 1 stone? Like, are you clear on what it is that you're trying to achieve? Because just because you can doesn't always mean that you should. That's what I'd think about that one, Mark. What about you?
Yeah, so I think anytime you do anything, it's really, you want to know what the end objective is going to be, what's the output that you want to achieve, and that's really what we're referring to with a goal. So if you want to use a bit of automation, for example, to increase to decrease the likelihood of incomplete data, for example, by using, say, for example, a screen flow to pop up a notification on your contact record to say, hey, you haven't completed this field. That's an example you could work with, and there's other examples that you could use in that regard. But again, it's like, what's your aim for doing this automation? Is it to increase productivity? Is it to decrease, again, let's say, the likelihood of incomplete fields? There's a lot of different things that this could be, but something that needs to be thought through as you're putting together this automation. So I think that's a really important point. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Luke? Or how
No,
it's working.
I think it's relatively. Nope, we covered everything.
Yeah, cool. So we'll move on to the next one. Now, this one is probably more for the admins and for the dev side of things rather than end users. But the question is, what other automation does this impact? So if you, it doesn't matter what automation you create necessarily, but if you've got, say, a process builder that is working on the contact record, and if you create a flow that either does the same task or if it has an impact on what that process builder is doing, you need to have a think about what is the knock-on effect on that as well. Same kind of thing with any automation, say whether it's flow to flow, whether it's workflow row and process builder and process builder. It doesn't matter necessarily what the combination is. It's about thinking how does this impact other automation that you have in your org, and does what we have set up, does it potentially break any of automation tasks? Does it cause any issues? There's say one flow that's a record trigger flow that updates a field in the contact record as the example. Does that impact a process builder which updates the same field, for example?
Yeah, and you've got to watch out for loops and recursion, and I think it's just to add on, Mark, to what you're saying. I think it's a really good point, particularly for quite well-established orgs. If you're potentially working on creation of new objects and fields and something's net new, then it's a little bit different. But I think for existing stuff, it's really worth considering. And I think a good start point, if you look in the object manager for a particular field and you're looking fields and relationships, you can use at a basic level the where is this used. So if you're considering making changes to an existing automation or considering how automation you're looking to might impact other fields, you can check on that field to see if it's linked to any workflow updates, any process builders, any flows, any Apex classes. It's really important to understand, because on the face of it, it might seem that, yeah, of course we can make that change. It seems straightforward. It's a good idea maybe, but always check the detail behind the scenes, because I think, it could have a big impact on other existing automations that you may not be aware exist.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't necessarily think we needed to go too much into it, but one thing I will say is again, we are going to be doing some Q&A if there's any questions. So if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat or in the Q&A, which should be available at the top right-hand side of your page if you're on desktop. I'm not quite sure how it looks on mobile, but I assume it's very similar. So shall we move on to the next?
Yeah,
point,
sure.
Cool.
Sure.
Okay. So the next one is, how will you manage technical debt? So before I give my thoughts, because my thoughts are probably not as extensive as yours at the moment on this one, what do you think about this point?
Yeah, I think my definition or my personal view of technical debt is the baggage which you create over a period of time as your system grows and evolves. And I think what you can see from the graph is at the start of change, things become quite easy, but over time, as things get increasingly complex and there's different waves of releases, you're always leaving behind a footprint behind the scenes back end, a thing that's either using system resources or is quite difficult. So I think if you were to, let's say you've got some existing automation and you're looking to improve that, so you've got a refreshed view of how to make that a little bit better, it's so critically important that you consider, if any of your existing automation has become obsolete or it's no longer needed, how are you going to regress that? Or how are you going to refactor any code that needs to be worked? I think it's easy to look at the solution and think, well, we need to do X, Y, and Z, and we're going over here. It's really important as well that you consider that technical debt of them processes that may well still be running behind the scenes. So I think it links back to the last point a little bit about knowing what you're automating and the impact it might have. But I think it's really important that, as well as developing the solution, which is great, it's really important to consider the technical debt that you might leave behind from changes and things like that. So that would be my take on this one, Mark.
Yeah. The only thing I would really add to that is around technical debt. One aspect of technical debt which we don't necessarily talk about as much, because we don't necessarily think of it as a technical thing, is our knowledge of different tools. So in that one, what I'm kind of referring to is how Salesforce over the last almost year now have been seeing in the documentation and the guidance that they were recommending admins start to learn Flow, because Process Builder and Workflow Rule aren't being developed any further. They're basically staying in exactly the same way as what they are. So that, and for many admins in the non-profit sector, particularly that from who I've talked to, and I think we had a comment about in the chat earlier on, there seems to be a bit of hesitancy to start learning Flow, because Flow has been traditionally viewed as this big beast that is more of a developer thing. So lots of admins haven't tried it, to be honest, and that can lead to a point where, when Salesforce eventually get to a point that Process Build and Workflow will get completely retired, which in full transparency, it's not going to happen for a very, very long time, if ever. But there are a lot of people in the community think it will at some point, but that some point could be 10, 15 years down the line. But when you see these kind of tools where you kind of get this bit where the people who develop the program, in this case Salesforce, turn around and say, this is how you should be doing your automation to admins, and they're not developing the other tools, then that can create some technical debt as well, because what you have is you end up working with lesser versions of a tool, less powerful versions of automation in this regard, and then not really being able to do the best within your org. So it's always good to try and learn things like Flow as well, for that reason. But that would be my main views around the technical debt side, in terms of like how using lesser powerful versions of automation tools can have an impact going forward. That impact now is quite small. If we're going to be completely transparent about it, it's quite small. But as Flow gets bigger and bigger and better, that gap is going to become much more extensive.
Yeah, and I think in terms of developing different automation solutions, you've got a personal responsibility. Do as much as you can to capture as much information about the solution as you can. So if you have a process builder, fill out the descriptions, timestamp it, put your name on it, show the user stories that it's linked to, give you thoughts on the intention behind it. Just because over time, you've probably seen it as well in all of the orgs, maybe you encounter, you just get more and more and more and more automation or technical debt, and it'll get to a point where you come across things and you've got no idea where they've come from, what they're related to, when they were put in, what's the version control. So I think it's try to exhibit some good practices from the off, whichever solution you're looking at, do some good housekeeping around documentation.
Absolutely. In regards to documentation, one of the things that I've personally been working through, and this is something that I would encourage anybody else to try, is actually coming up with some templates for documentation. And one of the templates I've been working on for about a month now is around Flow. And I've also been working on ones for like the lightning record pages and things like that as well. But I would encourage people to kind of start working towards building their own documentation templates that they can use, because documentation is just good practice in one sense. And the way I've started thinking about documentation, particularly in the last number of months, is what happens when I move on from the organization I'm currently working on. If documentation stays in the position that's traditionally been, where the vast majority of it's in my head, then the person who comes in to replace me in the future isn't going to have a clue what half of this stuff is. So having a good documentation is a good point as well. And I think that's very much tied to the technical debt point.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. And with that being said, we are on to our last point, which is around best practice guidelines. This is one of the ones that can get quite controversial within the community. But a good question to ask yourself is, are you aware of what is currently viewed as best practice guidelines when it comes to automation? And are you following that? Now, in full transparency, it's quite hard to do that with Flow. Although we'll share a link into the chat for that, because Salesforce have recently released a good blog on best practice guidelines for Flow.
Just share that one, guys, in the chat.
Great, cheers, Luke. But Flow is very much debated when it comes to the best practice guidelines. You have some who in the community who say you should only have one flow per object. Some who would say you should only have one type of flow, so record triggered, schedule triggered, auto launched, screen flow. You should only have one of them per object. Then there's other people who say you should only have one type of trigger for a flow per object. So you can have, so in that argument, you would have multiple record triggered flows, but you'll only have one for update, one for create, one for create or update, and one for deleted. So there's a lot of debate within that. And the other side of that coin is a lot of the debate around it is actually coming from organizations who have a relatively big Salesforce orgs, where the amount of iterations that they would go through would possibly hit the governance limits for Flow. Whereas for a lot of smaller organizations, that's not as likely. So that's something to bear in mind. However, these best practice guidelines are good to follow, because if your organization is in a position where it'll grow and it'll get to a point where it's big enough to have those concerns, then you're already working towards it. And also means you're actually applying these best practices, from the get-go.
Yeah. And I think in respect of best practice, I think everybody will find their own sort of network of trust, either within their own organization where they've got an expertise around this. They might find it from the community. They might find it from guidance like this. But the main thing I would encourage is just keep the conversation open, guys, for people that are particularly new to it. What we tried to do when we came up with the tips and tricks, I think if the previous, I think this might be our last point, but all the points that we've made previously, even if any of you were new to the actual solution itself of Flow, but you had a really good understanding of who you were designing for, what the user story was, what your automation goal was, any existing evaluation of what they have today. If you're armed with that really good information, you can reach out then to your network, and I guarantee you'll have a good conversation, or you'll get some good advice. And I think if you feel confident enough to develop your own solution by yourself, and you work quite independently and you don't really have that network, well, you can check some of these best practices. If you do feel comfortable enough to reach out to the community, you're armed with a really good question, to be honest. And I'm new to Flow, 100%. I think probably only about 6 months ago I got into Flow. I came onto a client project where I had to work on it. I had a very steep learning curve. Fortunately, I had a good guide or mentor, but we got a good solution, which was checked. But I'm having to go and sort of learn all the time. But I think it's so subjective. But the more you know about your context, the better. The more you're designing the right solution for your context, it's the better you'll be. So I think it's good, but don't panic if you're just starting out. Know your use case really well. People will help you. There's information out there. There's guidance out there. This documented best practice is good. It's good. It's good to see it. I think it came out 2 or 3 days ago, but it's nice. People are putting a lot of thought into it.
Yeah. And with that being said, I don't think there's any much more to add to that point. But I really do like what you said there, Luke, about building that network of trust in regards to some of these questions and these points. As I mentioned before, I honestly think that any of these points work outside of automation, and these also work for any kind of automation. Doesn't matter whether it's workflow rule, process builder, flow, Apex triggers, or whatever other types of automation you might be working with. These points all apply, I think. And I think that is the last point that we had. It is. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And before we pass over to Anja, going to just see, did anybody have any questions they wanted to ask in the chat?
We don't have any in the chat, but if anyone has got anything to ask, please feel free to, if you feel comfortable just to ask. But at the same time, if you haven't got any questions, don't worry. I think if you look, if you work perhaps as a solo admin and there might not be anybody to talk to within your organization or the community, these community groups are great, because there's so much expertise on there. We've got Susanna who joins us. She's experienced certified architect, always looking to sort of help people. Me and Mark from a very different level. Again, we've got different levels of expertise, but I'd always be willing to talk something out with somebody, provide a bit of guidance, help out. But I think you will build on a solid foundation if you consider the who, what, when, and the context, and you'll end up with a better solution if you start there. It's easy sometimes to be past the solution for someone. I think, yeah, okay, we could do that. It makes sense, and you can just jump in and do it. But stop, pause yourself, because yeah,
absolutely. So I can't see any questions in the chat, but what we'll say at this point, see is that message? Okay, so good. We do have a question. So the question here is, what is the recommended steps to get started for the newbies with flows? We can tag team this one. I'll chip in very quickly with some of my thoughts, because one of the things I recommend to admins who I talk to when they say, what's the best way to learn Flow, is to sign up for a developer org, and we can put the developer org link in the chat as well. But sign up for a developer org and start building flows. From my experience, I learned Flow best by actually doing it from the experience, and I think that's quite a valid point. There's also some really good Trailhead modules out there. So whilst Angela is sharing, I can certainly find the starter Flow for that. That's a good one. The Flow troubleshooting one is a good one as well. But as much as I love Trailhead, the caveat I will put on there is that if you're the type of learner who doesn't take much in from basically being told how to do something or having someone holding your hand through it, you might not pick up as much with Flow, because it is a very it's almost developer light. That's I guess how I would put Flow. It's a bit of a step up from traditional admin tasks, but it is really good to learn. And I see Claire's commented there about like in the troubleshooting Flow, and I can see Aka shared a good video with flows. One other channel I'll dig up as well and share in the chat is Alex Fram Schwartz's YouTube channel for Flow. He did a series in June, where he basically gave you challenges to build out flows. Didn't tell you how it was done. He just said, "Here's the use case. Go build it." And of all those challenges are finished, those were very helpful to me in my kind of thinking through how to do Flow as well, because there's a bit more to Flow than just building it. There was things to do in terms of like how do you do things in the best way. But on my side, I'm more than happy to chat further off air of anybody about Flow, because Flow is one of my passion areas in Salesforce.
And to be honest, it's kind of where this session came from, because me and Mark have been talking back and forth for months about something new Mark's learned in Flow and said, hey, do you know you can do this? And we've just gone back and forth, which sort of led to this. But good point from Claire to look at your existing orgs. There might be flows already in there which you don't know exist. It'd be good to understand how they work. I think in addition to what Mark said, I like YouTube. If it's a particularly new topic, sometimes maybe not within your own org, but initially by myself, I like to see how things work. So you could watch some videos, not on how to do it, but what the output is. So you could just follow some videos to see what Flow can do. And sometimes in your head, if you can conceptualize what it can do, I think that's pretty cool as well, because then you can figure out perhaps how to do it and who to talk to and what guide to read. But there's so much, depending on your learning style and your preference and your approach. I think there's loads out there. So go for it. self-tour.
Great. Cool. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but if there any more does come, we're happy to pick up on them later on. But we do have our next speaker who we're going to pass over to. So fingers crossed this actually works. So Angela, I'm going to make you a presenter, and whilst that is getting sorted out, we'll.
Just while we pass over to Angela as well, it's great to have her here with us, but we think it's even better that Angela's based in the Northeast. She's been an active part of our group as well as the Women in Tech group, and that it's just cool. You'll hear about her involvement now, but I think it's brilliant that that's coming from the Northeast, and we're happy to celebrate that. I think, it's cool.
Absolutely. Okay, so while I'm just getting sorted out to the microphone, there should be a pop-up on screen which gives you an OK button in order to enable access to the camera and the microphone. But yeah, as Luke said, Angela was part of the group that. Okay. Okay. I'm just going to try and see if we can troubleshoot this. Oh.
No. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can, yes.
Excellent.
Great.
We can hear.
Video. Oh, is that going to work?
It
takes a second. There we are. Hello, everyone.
Cool. So before we completely pass over to Angela and pass over to Vince, as Luke said, one of the things that one of the reasons that we asked Angela to speak about this is because Angela was part of the group that put together the new user designer certification, and we were so chuffed that somebody who we know who's from the Northeast, who as Luke mentioned, being part of our groups, has been involved in putting this together. So that's the main reason for asking Angela to present, because Northeast and put together something which personally I think is probably so far all the certifications I've looked at and goes, I think I might try for that one. This has been the one that's been like on the top of my list since I first saw it come out. But Angela, we'll pass over to you and let you take it away.
Representing Newcastle. Yes, thank you both very much, and I hope you'll stick around on screen so I'm not on my own over here. This is new software for me. I haven't used this one before. But yes, thank you very much, Mark and Luke. So good evening, everyone. My name is Angela, and I'm from the Northeast. I'm in Northumberland right now, and so I'm very close to Newcastle. I've spent a lot of time in Newcastle, and in my day job, I work for PwC in the UK as a Salesforce design strategist. So I've got this slot to update you all on the launch of Salesforce's new UX designer exam, which is very exciting because it is the first exam for UX and human-centered design professionals within the Salesforce ecosystem. So earlier this year, Salesforce identified that they had a bit of a gap in their ecosystem, and they were hypothesizing that people exist in Salesforce roles who focus on things like user experience, usability, human-centered design, accessibility, design strategy, and other surrounding topics, but they weren't yet accommodating those people in their official roles and in their certification tracks. So they wanted to change that. They wanted to make these people feel validated and appreciated and recognized. So Salesforce scoured their network around the world to find people who were working within the Salesforce Ohana who were also a subject matter expert in an aspect of user experience design. And they wanted to find these people so that they could make quite a tight working group to work with Salesforce's own design experts and exam writing experts so that they could co-design a brand new certification, which is the Certified User Experience Designer. So I applied to be part of this group and I was accepted. We kicked off in March this year, and since then we've spent many hours, mostly in evenings for me, because I was mostly working with people in American time zones, so places like San Francisco, DC, Wisconsin, Indiana, all on conference calls, huddled around a Miro board and pinging each other on Slack and co-designing this brand new exam. So I must say, I've had an absolute blast working with these people. We've had a lot of fun working together to co-design this. So together we've collaborated on things including the topics that should be on the exam, the percentage of the exam that each topic should be worth, the questions themselves, sometimes through writing, sometimes through peer review, and the pass mark. And now this information is out in the world, the exam is out in the world. So I can tell you that the topics that are on the exam are discovery, UX fundamentals, human-centered design, declarative design, testing, and SLDS, the Salesforce Lightning Design System. So as I say, the exam is now live. It's ready to be taken. Do bear in mind that as a brand new exam, there aren't any focus on course materials. There's barely any Udemy, Salesforce, Ben, etc. Although I must say, scouring the likes of LinkedIn, I'm seeing increasing numbers of blogs and stuff going out there, which is great. And actually, Luke put up some Twitter content yesterday. So there's increasing amounts of content out there. But what there is some really strong trailhead content. There's a full trail to follow to prepare for the exam. And there's a module which has mock questions to help you to assess whether you're feeling ready to take the exam itself. So I took the exam myself last month, and I'm very pleased to say that I passed it. Phew. No, I did not get 100% on every module, in case you are wondering. I was very relieved to have passed. So yeah, it is a learning that those exam nerves, that sense of imposter syndrome, they don't go away. They're still there, still healthy to acknowledge them, even when you're working on an exam that you're part of the team to co-design it. So I also have to congratulate Luke, who passed the exam yesterday. Would you like to tell us a bit about that, Luke, about your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. For all of the reasons Angela just mentioned about design being recognized as a discipline, people's interests, aspirations around design, the user experience, a lot of things. I was excited to see this as well. Studied design thinking maybe 10 or 12 years ago, like a long time ago at university, been in different roles. So I saw this come out and I was like, perfect. I'm excited to do that. Asked my boss to book it. I gave myself 4 weeks to prepare for it. I did utilize the trail mix. It's very good. I think particularly the module for the studying for the UX designer is very good because within each of the exam sections, the modules and references and resource materials they give you are very relevant for the exam. So it's interesting. For those that don't know, I failed it the first time round, which was last Friday. I came out of the exam with quite good energy. They were good questions. It was a well-structured exam. I wanted to retake it again the same day because I felt quite positive about it, but obviously you have to have a delay. And then I went back again yesterday morning and got it again. I had a look at it. I saw a weakness in the Salesforce Lightning Design System, which was, out of all the topics, was a new section to me. I'd only really picked it up in detail in preparation for this cert. And also on the declarative design. Now on that one, I thought, hang on, I should know a bit more about this one. But I think the really important focus is on the end user. So you've got all different form and functionality of different tools on the platform. That's great. You know what they can do, what they can't. You've got to put yourself in the shoes of the user, and from them different form and functions, what's the best use for the user experience. And I think that's a really good way. That's really cool, and I think it's taking what it's just applying it in a different context. So I think great cert, good prep material. If you go on the trail mix and you see you've covered 50% of the content from work you've done for admin and app builder, go back round again, because I didn't. I filled in the gaps, went through it quite quickly, and then when I failed and had to do the retake, when I went back, I was like, that's some really useful stuff in there, and I covered it 16 months ago. Well, it's gone now. So don't underestimate time involved, but the material is there for you, and there's loads of links, references, blogs, videos, and I'd encourage anyone with an interest to get stuck in and give it a go. I think it's brilliant.
Thanks, Luke. And I always doubly thank people for being really honest with us when they failed the first time. That is so, like, that is such helpful information, I find, for everyone else. So on behalf of everyone else, thank you for being honest and sharing that with us. I think that's really useful information. What have I got on the screen here? At the top of the screen there, highlighted, I've got the link to the Trailhead page about the credential. And that top banner is from that page. It's featuring Asterisk, who is also in our group, our co-design group. We've got the badge that a certified user experience designer gets, which has the pink ribbon on it. You'll have seen that all of the new badges are color coded with a ribbon at the bottom, and UX designer is pink. I've got my certification, and I've got some of that trailhead content, some of the trail mixes we were talking about there. So there's the module, the specific module on studying for the exam, which Luke was talking about, which has those practice questions. And then there's the overall trail mix on preparing for your user experience designer credential. So here is a slide that I quickly put together on what the exam means for me, because in our industry, we've got people who know UX best practices, but want to learn so that they can apply them to Salesforce. And then we've also got people who already know Salesforce, but want to learn UX best practices to improve the usability of the things that they're producing. And they're both really valid places to approach this exam from. Gaining the certification, I feel, proves that you sit somewhere in the middle of that Venn diagram. What this reminds me of is a talk that we had a couple of months ago over in the Newcastle Women in Tech group from a lady called Penny Haslam, because Penny framed that you don't need to be an expert in a topic in order to have some expertise in that topic. And I find that that's a really brilliant way to look at things. If you have some experience and you know some things, then you've therefore got some expertise. And that's what you're proving by taking this exam, that you've got some expertise in this field. So yeah, this exam is a brilliant example of that. That's what you're proving. And you don't need to be the expert in order to take it. In fact, design doesn't even need to be in your job or job title. There's lots of people across the Salesforce ecosystem. There's admins, developers, architects that all have and use some design skills to varying degrees in the day-to-day tasks that they do. And this exam, I feel, is a great way to show on your CV that you have and that you use those skills. So aside from the exam, Salesforce have been internally naming 2021 the year of the designer, because there's a lot that's happening here in this space. They also last month officially launched designer as a Salesforce role, as a career path. And this is a page here from Trailhead that's setting it out, and you might recognize someone on this page, my 5 minutes of fame. So there will be a healthy stream of new Trailhead content, blog posts, podcasts. There was a trail to follow at Trailhead DX a couple of months ago, and also there will be a Dreamforce in due course. Lots of information, lots of content that's there to support this new designer role. Over on Salesforce's Salesforce Design Medium blog, and again, the link is shown here on screen, highlighted. I've contributed an article which is setting out my own unconventional path to becoming a Salesforce designer. So please do give that a read if you find the time. That tells the story of how, after being diagnosed with a brain tumor myself, I was helped on my road to surgery recovery by the brain tumor charity, who were made able to serve me the right content at the right time during my journey through their use of Salesforce, and how that inspired me to pivot my career path to gain those Salesforce skills. So finally, some calls to action from me. I'd really like everyone here to take some form of action. Please take some form of action to up your credentials in the Salesforce design space. That would be awesome. But please do what feels right for you. So it might be a small thing. Some examples are you could take a look at the designer career trail mix on Trailhead. So this is different from the trail mix that's getting you ready for the exam. There's a separate but related trail mix, which is more generally about the designer career, which is also good to look at. And you could take a couple of modules to upskill in design. You could follow Salesforce's design blog, so medium.com/Salesforce-UX, and Salesforce UX on Twitter. They've also recently launched at SF Design Days, Salesforce Design Days on Instagram, which is also worth a follow. And you can review the trailhead information on the designer role and see if that resonates with you. So that's if you just went to Trailhead's homepage, there's information set out on all of the different roles in the ecosystem, and designer is one of them. You'll see Asterisk's face from who you saw on the screen before, and you click on his face, and that gives you the information about Salesforce Designer as a career path. So that's a medium-sized thing. And then the big things, of course, study for, take, and pass the exam. So yeah, I might let Luke off on that one, on taking any actions, seeing as he passed the exam yesterday. But yeah, so that's everything from me, and I can take some questions in the chat. What I will put in the chat is a couple of links, helpful links. And there's the link and the second link to the designer career trail mix. There's a small gap between those two links there.
That's great, Angela. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think it's a very cool story, and yeah, it's really good. I've maybe got one question to kick us off, if that's all right. How large is your network of Salesforce designers? Obviously, it's, you're a design strategist for your job, large company, but like outside of PwC, how big's your network of fellow other people working within design in Salesforce?
I would say that it has grown massively through being part of this co-design group. That's been a brilliant way to meet other people around the world who are concentrating on design within the Salesforce ecosystem. And also recently, having posted about the exam and things like that on LinkedIn, I've had various people follow me as well. So it's growing all the time. But I would say it feels like a very new field. So it's something that's rapidly expanding.
No, it's good. Really cool.
Great. So thanks Angela for that so much. Again, this is definitely on my top, probably like one list of certs that I want to do. So it'll be, so for me it's obviously if I pass, I'll pass this before the end of the year. That's currently my target. But we do actually have a question in that's coming in the Q&A, which I think is a really good question. And so the question's from Monique, and it says, just curious, as kind of missed the beginning part of this, but are there other certs you need before you can do this one? Like, is admin cert required, for example? I think that's a really good question.
That is a very good question, and thank you, because that's something that I missed telling you. There aren't any prerequisite certs for the UX designer exam. Yes, I know that quite often you need to take admin first, but for this exam you do not. There aren't any prerequisite exams to take before this one.
That's great. I've got to jump to Salvatore's comment quickly, because he said, I'm curious to know what tools are used within the Salesforce design profession to manipulate the HTML and CSS in order to change the designer UI. And what I would say is, it's a big, massive part of the Salesforce Lightning design system module. So again, if you follow the trail mix, Salvatore. It was my most interesting part of the prep because I discovered a lot about the Lightning Web components. I had to download Visual Studio to work with the HTML and CSS and JavaScript. You were using GitHub and repositories. There's an unbelievable amount of automation on the Salesforce Lightning Design System, and genuinely, there's so much out there that I wasn't even aware of that just makes me think that's fantastically cool. It's really good. But if you were to hit the trail mix up, I think you'll definitely find the answers to those questions.
Yeah, well said, Luke. Same for me. This was my biggest learning area by far, was learning about Lightning Design System. I can also pop a link in the chat, which you might have had before, to the Lightning Design System itself. If you just wanted to kind of go around and have an explore, have a read of the design guidelines. And for me, doing that alongside reviewing the Trailhead content kind of helped it to click in my head and go, oh, okay, that's what they're talking about.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily for the same thing, but if you are on the call and you have got some expertise with Lightning Web Components, Lightning Web Components Trailhead recommend you use Visual Studio as part of that as well. So you might have already got some experience with the same program from that respect. But yes, I kind of want to hop back quickly though onto the cert kind of question, because Luke and I were talking about this the other week, and I know I mentioned about this on the Women in Tech call. But the question I'd be asking is kind of what cert do we think would be good to go alongside this? Because as you mentioned there, it's a cert that technically at the moment sits on its own. There's no kind of progression path at the moment. It's just that cert. But with Salesforce being a platform with many different tools and many different elements to it, what other certs do we think might fit with that? I might let Luke mention about his point in a second, because I think that was quite a good point. But I'll pass it over to you first, Angela. What certs do you think would?
Thanks, Mark. And I notice you say it sits on its own at the moment, and I always emphasise that at the moment, because certainly. I mean, and this is my own point of view and what I want, and it is a forward-looking statement. But I personally would really like to see designers having a career path within Salesforce that's akin to architects. How you can do all of the exams and present to a panel and become a certified technical architect. In the future, I would love to see that for designers. And I feel like this is the first step towards that. But yeah, that's all, forward thinking, forward looking and aspirational. But yes, while it is the first exam in this area, I personally found that in my prep for the exam, I was leaning most of all of the other certs that I already have, I was leaning mostly on my app builder cert. Certainly for the section on declarative design, I was leaning heavily on that. I've also heard others say that Experience Cloud is the natural cert that sits with this one. I actually don't have my Experience Cloud cert yet. That one's next on my list, so I can let you know when I've got it. Do either of you have Experience Cloud cert?
No.
That's one for us to explore.
Yeah.
Or maybe anyone can tell us in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be good to hear that. Just having for me, or for if things go well, again forward-looking statement. If I pass, I will be platform app builder certified before the end of August. As my next exams due in a few weeks' time. But I'll quickly, before I pass over the question to Luke, because I really want to hear the point that you mentioned to me when we were talking on Zoom the other week, because I thought that was such a good point, Luke.
You might have to remind me what it was, but
if you forgot, I could remind you, because it's
yeah.
I want to just quickly mention Salvatore's point about the business analyst cert. There is something in the works with that, but again, it's nothing's being formally announced. It's just people who know other people know that there's been work towards that. So what I would say with that is the business analyst cert is pretty much a definite as far as it's coming. So just keep an eye out on things like social media, on Salesforce's blog, because like they do with the UX designer one, as soon as that is ready to start getting rolled out, or however long it was. I'm trying to remember how long it was before the cert actually rolled out when Salesforce announced it. There will be an announcement coming, but there will be a business analyst cert at some point in the not too distant future. And I think that could be also a good fit as well, because business analyst is very much tied to requirements gathering, which is so crucial. But yeah, so in terms of what you were saying, like, I guess I'll quickly highlight what you said, because I thought it was such a good fit. And we were talking about this coming from an admin perspective. And what you'd said to me this week was you thought, this was before you did the cert, so I don't know if your opinions changed since doing the cert, but you'd said that you thought that a good kind of collection of certs for the admin would be the administrator certification, the platform app builder, and the UX cert, combining those three. So the way you termed it was the admin cert shows that you know how to administrate the platform. App builder shows that you know how to build upon the platform that's already existing. And then the UX cert would be you understand how to design from a human-centric perspective to coincide with that. Would you still agree with that after taking the cert?
Yeah, I think they're a really good trio. I think I appreciate if you're starting out and you're looking for certs, or you're trying to find some logic in the change that you need a pathway or you need it to build up to this thing. But I think follow the certs which are engaging for you and just follow your interest in them. So the design one, it's better that it stands. It's not better that it stands alone, but I enjoy the fact that it stands alone. It's new. It stands alone. It does impact and interact with all of those other functions of admin, architect, solutions, developers. Salesforce just, it hasn't recognized it, but it's taken a massive first step in it. So like, collect certs that, if you're career driven and want to go down a certain path route and you enjoy following that path, brilliant. Like, that's excellent for you. If you want to take unique ones that one sits a bit over here and the other one over there, but you feel good about it, I've always come out of every cert I've taken with something positive. So I'm not saying pro must have certifications, but I've always learned something from doing a cert. And I think I knew nothing about Salesforce Lightning Design System 2 weeks ago. And then I built Lightning Web Components. I've done so much cool stuff related to this that then has led to good conversations. I've made connections. I'm doing further reading. I'm interested in this over here, so yeah. But for those starting out, I think it is a good point. You can administer the system, you can build on the system, and you can recognize the importance of design on the system. I think that's a really good starting trio if you're interested in them.
Yeah, great. Cheers. So if there's any more questions, again, just feel free to post them in the chat. If there isn't, what we'll do is we'll move into our giveaway section. And because of the way things have worked out, we are going to have to change things a little bit on the fly, because what we were planning was given a voucher to the best question from each presentation. However, there's only been one question on each. So by the process of elimination, Monique and Salvatore, you both get a cert voucher for the question that you have asked. So please do DM myself in the DM section here, just to pass me your email address. And just to make sure, for clarity, those email addresses, we've been told from Salesforce, those emails have to be the ones that are matched to your web assessor account. If you don't have a web assessor account already, that's fine, because you can just create one. But if you do have one, if we have the same email address that coincides with that, and then we can pass it on to Salesforce itself.
You can both book the UX exam.
There you go. Exactly.
You can book what you like, but
exactly. I'll stop recording here actually, because we don't need to record this stuff anymore. But one thing